Okay, welcome back to the video. So just as a reminder, the formula for mean is the sum of the frequency multiplied by the data value divided by the number of pieces of data. So again, the frequency multiplied by the data value for each of them, add them all up, and divide by 20. This one is just 7 because the frequency is 1, so you don't have to do 1 times 7 because that's just going to make 7. So since the number of data, which is n, is the same as adding up all the frequencies, your mean can also be written as the sum of the frequencies multiplied by their data value divided by the sum of all the frequencies. So when you make this calculation, you get 8.3 grams. So if your data has a unit, you need to include that. So include units. Alright, so your median. So we're going to find the mth position. So there's 20 pieces of data. Add 1 divided by 2. That gives 10.5. So it's in between the 10th and the 11th. So to find out which is the 10th and which is the 11th, you just have to start counting up your frequencies. So this is 1. When you add 2, you get 3. When you add 7, you get 10. So the 10th piece of data is 8, which makes the 11th piece of data 8.5. And that works out to 8.25 grams. Lastly, the mode. In this case, it's going to have the highest frequency. Because the frequency means how often each piece of data occurs. So the mode is going to be equal to 8 because that has the highest frequency right there. So some things to make sure you remember is the number of pieces of data is the same as the sum of all the frequencies. You want to make sure you include your units. You want to make sure that you know that the mode is the highest frequency. And you just really want to make sure that you're following these formulas. So let's move on to the next example. This would be the hardest one you would get here. What you have in this case are intervals. So if you're looking at the height of different people, there are 5 people whose heights are in between 120 and 125. You don't know where they are within that range. They could all be 120, they could be in between. So the best that we can do is to just say that all 5 people are 122.5. And do you know where we get this number? It's just the midpoint of these two values. So add up these two values, divide by 2. So whenever your data comes in intervals, the values you're going to use for x are the midpoints of each interval. So right here, when dealing with data in intervals, use the midpoint of each interval. So the midpoint here is 127.5. The midpoint here, 132.5, 137.5, and 142.5. So mean, again, frequency multiplied by the x value. So there are 5 values of 122.5. 5 values of 122.5. 20 values of 127.5. 8 values of 132.5. 16 values of 137.5. And 7 values of 142.5. And to figure out what you divide that by, we have to add up all the frequencies. When you add up all the frequencies, you get 56. So there are 56 pieces of data. There are not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of data. There's 5 different pieces of data, but there's 56 pieces of data altogether. So this gives you a value of 132.5 centimeters. Don't forget your units. For your median, the mth position is 56 plus 1 divided by 2, which is 28.5. So we're looking in between the 28th and the 29th piece of data. So start counting up. 5 pieces of data plus 20 gives you 25. So we're at the 25 pieces of data here. We want 28. So when we add 8, that gives us 33. That means the 28th and the 29th value would be 132.5. So since they're both the same, you don't have to average them. Don't forget your units. And lastly, the mode. Which value occurs most often has the highest frequency. It is 127.5. Now when your data is in intervals, another word for intervals is class or bins. Fathom uses the word bins a lot, and there's also the word class, but it just means the intervals. There may be questions that ask you for the modal class. If the question asks you for the modal class, it means give the interval, not the midpoint. So the modal class would be 125 to 130. So it's basically the interval that has the highest frequency. So please make sure you know that terminology, because that does come up on tests and quizzes, and a lot of times people forget what that means. Last type of question are questions where the frequencies are given as percentages or also called weightings. So if we were to make a table of values, our X values would be the mark, and our frequencies would be the weightings. So he got a 78, his mark was 78 in knowledge, 70 in application, 85 in communication, and 72 in thinking. The weighting of knowledge is 35. The weighting of application is 30. The weighting of communication is 15. And the weighting of thinking is 20. So when your frequencies come as percentages, you just treat them like they're frequencies, and you do all the math exactly the same. So your mean is, there are 35 78s. So again, it's the frequency multiplied by the data value. So there are 35 78s. There are 30 70s. There are 15 85s. And there are 20 72s. And that's going to be divided by the sum of your frequencies, which is going to be 100. And that works out to 75.45. So his mark is approximately 75%. So that's what you would do with one of these word problems, is just set up a frequency table, and your weightings are just your frequencies. So those are all the different types of examples you're going to get when you work on your homework in class. If there's any of this that you didn't understand, please make note of it and ask your teacher in class. Thank you and goodbye.